My guest today is Sandra Kwak, CEO and founder of 10 Power, a B corporation working towards climate justice. 10 Power supports communities to develop, own and operate renewable energy projects with a workforce development and gender equity lens. In Haiti, 10 Power has developed, financed and built solar projects for water purification and health organizations and launched a women's solar installer training program in partnership with local installers and institutions. Sandra serves as a board member at the Foundation for Climate Restoration, working on solutions to bring the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere back down to 300 parts per million by 2050. She's a partner at Resilient Markets, applying regenerative design principles to realize the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Her TED Talk, in which she sheds light on the global impact of first world countries and the crucial role of fourth world nations, opened my eyes to many blind spots. Without further ado, let's delve into Sandra's journey and learn what inspired her to commit to climate justice through the impactful work of 10 Power. Hi, Sandra. A very warm welcome to Atlanta Diaries.
Hi, Emma. Thank you for having me here today. Really appreciate it.
I'd love to explore the pivotal moments that shaped your commitment to this meaningful cause of advancing climate justice. Take us back to those key moments in your journey.
Well, I think my first big eye-opening experience around climate justice was in grad school when we had a class project. I went to Presidio Graduate School, which is a green MBA, and each class, each semester, we would do outside consulting projects with other organizations. And for our finance class, we designed a microfinance model working with a local NGO in Nicaragua. And this microfinance model would take grants and help organic farmers, collectives to implement solar-powered water systems to increase their crop yields, which enabled farmers to not have to go during the dry season down to Costa Rica to work so they could stay in place and continue growing food locally. And then it created a revolving grant where a fund would be replenished from which local people could draw down and get solar on their homes as well. And we implemented some of the projects there in person and helped to install them. And then we presented this microfinance model to 13 different collectives, and some people woke up before dawn and walked, for many, many kilometers to come and to see us and to work with us. And for me, it was very eye-opening, how far even a single watt can go in a family's life if they don't have electricity or access to reliable electricity, and how far a couple of dollars can go in terms of installations in markets that are really lacking equitable access to power. And so that was my first taste of working in climate justice and energy access. And I feel like I've had an activist streak to my work throughout my entire life. So really all of that's coming to a culmination with 10 Power.
Yeah. And, when I listened to your TED Talk, I just felt that we take so many things for granted, right? And such initiatives, I think these are just reminders to us on what all needs to be done and addressed. So thank you for doing all the work that you're doing.
Thank you too. Yeah, I feel like for me, the last couple of years have been really illuminating in terms of energy and justice right here within the United States. So I started 10 Power in Haiti, working in one of the places with the lowest access to electricity in the world. And then throughout, especially the pandemic years, starting to look closer to home and realizing that right here in the United States, the populations with the highest lack of access to electricity or energy poverty are Native American nations and residents on reservations. 14% of people living on reservations don't have access to electricity, and oftentimes don't have equal access to sanitation and running water as well. So the energy injustice issue is ever present right here in the US. And so 10 Power has focused our work right now working with Native American tribal nations and helping to leverage Inflation Reduction Act capital to realize climate justice here at home.
Wow. One would never imagine a developed country to have these kind of scarcities even now.
What happened when tribes' homelands were taken away from them is they were forced onto the worst land, basically the lowest yield agriculture, places with really harsh climatic conditions. And one of my mentors, I call him my uncle, Otto Braided here, he says, They gave us what they thought was the worst land, but now it's actually the best land because it hasn't been degraded in all of the ways that we consider conventional development, right, to be, where we're really degrading the natural ecosystem's ability to support life. And if you look at biodiversity across the world, 80% of the biodiversity that's remaining on the planet is under the stewardship of Indigenous peoples. And so it's incredibly important as we're looking not just at creating a sustainable future, but an actually regenerative future, that we look to the best practices that have been kept alive throughout time immemorial that Indigenous people have been stewarding. Not only injustice issues, but also solutions are spread throughout the United States across reservations, across homelands that are still in Native hands, and throughout the world in areas that are still under Indigenous management.
This takes me to the TED Talk on Fourth Nation building, Sandra. You discuss critical components like renewable energy, of course, but how come, gender empowerment and gender equality was so important in this mission?
When we're looking at climate, the human population has absolutely exploded. We just crossed 8 billion people, and there's an interesting concept called Earth overshoot. And so if you look at all of the Earth's resources as a bundle of goods for 1 year, Earth overshoot tells you on what day that we've used up all those resources, and it's getting earlier and earlier in the year. So it's just a way to conceptualize. It's like, okay, if you had a budget for the year and you blew through it in July, and then the next year you blew through it in May, it just shows us how much farther than the carrying capacity of the planet that humans are actually using. And so gender fits into this in many different ways, because if you look at societies where women have equal opportunity to the workforce, to earning potential, we're still not there. So there are a lot of metrics, which if you track from a human development index standpoint, the improvement of these metrics, then you see a leveling off of population. Because if you know that your children are going to survive, if there's low infant mortality rates, if your young girls and female identifying people in the population have early access to education, equal access to education, then you wind up with populations where you don't have the imperative to have so many children. And so what I see as hopefully the fullest expression of humanity's potential is a place where people can have as many children as they want to, but they feel like each of those children is going to have equal opportunity to realize their fully expressed and embodied selves in society. As far as we have been able to look with telescopes in every direction, we haven't found these conditions for life. So it's something to revere, respect, participate in, and preserve.
So much to think about, Sandra. And I really want to backtrack and understand, how did your early years shape your journey?
Yeah, my journey began in fourth grade when I was a little girl growing up in Austin, Texas. And I had an amazing teacher named Phoebe Allen who had a huge library of books in the classroom. It was a Montessori classroom, so the children were really free to explore. And I picked up this book called 50 Ways to Help the Earth. And this is the 90s, right? People aren't really talking about climate change. It's talking about how carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions from cars and from industry were creating this heat trapping blanket around the earth, which was causing global warming and was going to cause the earth to get hotter and hotter. And I felt like Chicken Little, right? I'm running around and I'm like, hey, did you guys know this? Like, why is nobody doing anything about it? Like, everyone pay attention. Like, look at this science, which is, probably how a lot of scientists still feel now, putting out these dire reports. If you read the IPCC reports of what the global consequences are going to be between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees Celsius average warming, it's really horrific, the impacts that amount of warming is going to have on the planet. And 2023 reports show that we're already at 1.48 degrees.
Wow.
But I don't feel like politicians or global leaders are reading those reports or taking them seriously. So I still feel, in a way like that little Chicken Little running around and trying to get people to pay attention to this. And so there in my fourth grade classroom, I dressed up like what I thought a scientist was. So I got cotton balls and made myself a beard and got one of my dad's white shirts and like pretended like it was a lab coat and gave a presentation to my school about global warming. And so I republished Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and drew a bunch of comics and did a little Xerox zine. So that was really where my journey began. The rest of my education and career, I've been dedicated to trying to reverse climate change and not only to get to, a point of stasis, whatever that looks like back to 1990 or now it's 2019 carbon levels, but really to remember that we are part of life on Earth, that we can be a regenerative force, that all other species are regenerative forces. There's no other species that just takes. Right? Like every single other species gives. If you think about the quintessential example of a tree creates fruit, not only to have offspring, a tree creates fruit for other animals to eat food, for compost, and for regeneration of the soil. And so there's this role that each species plays in the ecosystem. And I think that, with our giant prefrontal cortexes, humans had to forget it all to figure it out again, but they're indigenous wisdom keepers who still have those through lines and that knowledge. And it's up to all of us to re-indigenize ourselves at this point in our collective evolution.
So let's go back to that class 4 student in Austin, Texas, right? From there, she became an artist and then finally a strategist who had passion for sustainability. So take us through that journey. Like, how did you really navigate your path to 10 Power today?
Yeah, I feel like equity has always been very important to me. So whether that has manifested in my life as political activism or as climate activism, out of college, I started an art nonprofit and was doing an art magazine, which addressed a lot of political topics and artists who were addressing both social issues as well as political issues, and was doing some volunteering for political organizing. I also managed a photography studio. And then from there was feeling like the world was really waking up to sustainability and to climate issues. And this was around the time that Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out. And so I started, hearing sustainability on NPR. Like people talking about sustainability and climate in more mainstream news sources and really wanting to put myself in a position where I could more actively participate in that change. And that's what drove me to seek out Presidio Graduate School and get a degree specifically in green business. So that was an amazing program in terms of both having one foot in where we are now and one foot in where we need to be. And so I felt like that really gave me the tools that I needed to start my first social enterprise, which was an energy efficiency company called PowerZoa. So we were doing smart buildings kind of before smart buildings was a catchword. And from there went to work with AutoGrid. So we were involved in conversations with AutoGrid around demand response, which is being able to curtail your energy usage at times when power is the most expensive and scarce on the grid. And so during those peak usage hours, that electricity is the most expensive and it's the highest demand. And so if people, instead of using more electricity during those peak hours, can shift their usage to other hours when it's lower demand, we can prevent the most dirty and expensive power plants from coming online. So usually these are natural gas power plants for those peak times. Oftentimes they're located in low income communities of color. And so that causes disproportionate emissions and associated health impacts for those communities. And so it ties into not only environmentalism, but also environmental justice, being able to shift your power usage. So PowerZoa, my first company, was talking with AutoGrid about participating in demand response programs. AutoGrid invited me to come and manage their entire partner ecosystem and to run their marketing early in the company. It was employee number 7. They have grown their focus on big data for the smart grid to now be a virtual power plant company, and were recently acquired by Schneider Electric. And it's been an absolute exciting journey to be involved with AutoGrid, from that early stage, and helping to raise Series A all the way through, the acquisition. I left several years ago, around 2015, to start 10 Power, but have still been involved with the company on a consulting basis. And so I feel like just because technology is renewable, just because it could potentially reduce carbon dioxide doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be implemented in a way that uplifts frontline communities who are the ones who are suffering disproportionately from climate change and who contributed the least to the conditions which have created climate change. And so I think it's absolutely crucial that these solutions be deployed, first and foremost in frontline communities. So instead of looking at them as the end of the line, we should be looking at frontline communities as the beginning of the line.
So interesting. And such a passionate journey, Sandra. How did you find those partners? How did you find those like-minded people? And if there were any obstacles, how did you navigate them?
I think as female founders, we face a lot of the inherent obstacles. There's still very much a glass ceiling for entrepreneurs. The numbers speak for themselves with less than 2% of VC funding going to women. And I think it's 0.2% going to BIPOC founders. And so, raising capital is always a hurdle, and especially being a social enterprise and needing to get really creative about putting together blended capital stacks that are not just your traditional equity and debt, but also being able to structure different types of capital to pull off projects in some of the world's most difficult and risky markets. We actually launched a donor advised fund. So we have another vehicle for donors to be able to contribute money that has tax benefits associated for the donors. And then that capital is in a renewable energy access fund that we can use for projects. And we can use it both as grants for projects, and we can also use it as loan underwriting and very low interest concessionary rates loans for projects. So needing to be very nimble in terms of figuring out how to pull together capital for projects has been one way that we've been able to get things off the ground for 10 Power. I think, in terms of adversity in my journey, going into the most difficult market, this may just be, a personality trait of mine. If there's a burning building, I run towards it, So intentionally choosing places that have the greatest need and that also have the greatest risk and challenge is part of what drives me. So going to places that are incredibly difficult, the World Bank listed Haiti as the second most difficult place on the planet to do business. And I went there knowing this, but really overcoming that by having incredibly strong local partnerships, just going and being boots on the ground, using a humble learner need finding process of going and asking local people, what are your needs? What are the issues? There's lots of sun here, talking to local solar installers. Why is there not a huge solar market? And designing a business model around the needs of the community in partnership with community members. So trying to create markets where there is more access to capital and working in partnership with local installers, local institutions and businesses. And now working with tribal nations, really taking the time up front to form those partnerships, to build trust, coming from a very humble perspective with lots of respect for what's already there in the community and what the community already knows, that innate wisdom that's in the community, and building solutions hand in hand with community members. So that's the approach that we've taken, and that's how we've designed our solutions and hope to scale them.
Sandra, I want to sort of double click on this, and I appreciate that learner approach. You had the natural affinity to gravitate towards high risks, but a lot of people run away from high risks. So how did you find those like-minded people?
Yeah, we work all locally. So try to hire people who are from the community. In Haiti, it's been such an incredible, just eye-opening experience in terms of how talented Haitian people are. Your average Haitian speaks Creole, French, English, and Spanish, and they learn that in school. And so really hiring people who have the versatility to be able to communicate with rural and remote communities, to be able to be the bridge. People who are from that community has been incredibly important. Partnering with local academic institutions. So the Women's Solar Installer program that we started in Haiti was in partnership with Haiti Tech University, which had a program that was sponsored by the Solar Electric Light Fund. And so we were working with local Haitian solar installers to provide workforce opportunities for graduates from that program. And now the women from that program have been hired by local solar installers. So they have jobs in their own marketplace. And so really working in strong partnership with players. And then I think really having a mission, our mission is 100% renewables for 100% of humanity, and having a mission that attracts people who are heart driven, who are self-motivated to make the world a better place, is going to give you that team that will stop at nothing to make sure that the product is delivered, that the community is served, and that, the mission of the project is achieved. And so I just feel so incredibly lucky to have teammates who are attracted to 10 Power's mission, who also believe in the same mission and are doing this work in the world in service of a greater goal of helping people, of creating a prosperous planet. And when the adversity is right there in front of you, that's what gives you the strength to figure out a solution. And as you know, Haiti has been really incredibly and increasingly difficult since the assassination of the president a couple of years ago. There's been a lot of gang control of the ports, which has prevented fuel from flowing throughout the country. And because the country is so dependent on imported fossil fuels, when they get stuck at the port, it means people can't run their generators at their homes, at their businesses. They can't drive their cars. And what that means is you don't have access to go to the hospital. You don't have your water pump running for fresh water. It really creates life or death situations. And so the last project that we did in Haiti, which was sponsored by Sierra Club member donations and partially from our renewable energy access staff, was on a clinic with a maternity ward. And our local team put the panels into an ambulance to bring them out to the clinic to make sure they weren't interfered with by gang members, and is continuing to service that installation and make sure that it's creating electricity for women to be able to have access to healthcare and deliver babies. And so, the team's commitment to being able to figure out creative solutions to those challenges that arise really comes from a commitment to that greater goal.
So fascinating and so inspiring. Any anecdotes come to your mind when you were feeling stuck? Yet clearly there is that drive because of people around you and the importance of your mission.
Yeah. There are a lot of times in the trenches as an entrepreneur where you feel like the light is there in the distance and you can't see it as brightly, right? And
Yeah, so true.
I feel like coming back to that bigger picture for me is all about being in service and what am I in service to, and thinking about what the bigger picture is, both in terms of people that we're serving today with our projects and also future generations. A lot of times now that I have a little child, I think about their future and what is going to happen over the next 50 years. If you look at climate projections within their lifetime, what the consequences will be, if we don't all act now and do everything that we can to avert the climate crisis that we're headed straight towards. And then thinking in the larger context, there's Indigenous piece of wisdom that's often attributed to the Iroquois tribe of 7 generations, and thinking about every action that we take today and what the ramifications will be for 7 generations into the future. And so whenever I'm feeling disenchanted, I come back to that, what am I doing in service of my family's future, of everyone's families, of our larger family of humanity and all the creatures on planet Earth and 7 generations into the future. And it never hurts to, just go out and be in nature and just to appreciate, what everyone before us has done in terms of making sure that there's still green space for us to enjoy, taking a little breather, and getting back to the source.
How do you balance your responsibilities of being a new mom and again taking on this very ambitious role of a leader in sustainability?
Yeah, it's not easy. And the activist side of me is realizing what a big issue that we have in the US around lack of early childhood education and care. We're in the process right now of trying to get our baby into preschool, and it's a competitive and costly process. We have two parents in our family, and for families that only have one parent, I don't know how people are expected to work when there's no option for having your child in childcare, and it costs as much as community college, to send your baby to pre-K
Yeah.
when these are some of the most formative years in a child's life. In the US, we used to have the highest rates of OECD nations in terms of senior poverty as well as childhood poverty. And then we put in Social Security. So now our rates of senior poverty have gone down, but our rates of childhood poverty are still very high. And especially now that a lot of the COVID era pause on evictions have stopped, we're seeing families out in the streets. And so it's crazy to me that just because babies can't vote, they're not protected by policy, and that we don't have, good safety measures for taking care of our kids, especially, these are the future workers and citizens for our country. So even from a purely utilitarian perspective, you would want to be contributing to a fully actualized citizenry. That's the issue that we're facing right now in terms of just looking at the greater societal gap in terms of early childhood education. But with that said, how am I able to balance being a mompreneur? I'm really lucky to have a supportive partner. We also have my spouse's father living in our household. So he's on the floor above us in another apartment. So we're lucky to still have a little bit larger family structure. We're not just our nuclear family, but we have a lot of community around us. And our dream long term is that we want to build a co-housing community. So we're looking at models. There's, a very established Dutch model. A lot of Scandinavian countries have wonderful policy that helps to create co-housing. And what we would like to do is get land and have households where each individual family owns their house, but as a portion of what you own, you also have shares in the commons. And so there's a great hall where we can have shared meals, and cook for each other. And so you're responsible for helping the other families where the kids can run around and it's safe. There's car-free areas where kids can go and play and knock on neighbors' doors, and where we ideally have enough land to have gardens and orchards and help to steward healthy soil and water systems, have shared workshops and resources. Maybe not everybody needs to own a car, right? Maybe we have electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Maybe we have a shared boat, right? Like there's so much more opportunity for co-creating together, and it reduces the stress and the burden on individual nuclear families when we're going back to more of the village structure that we lived for tens of thousands of years with, right? It's just in the last
Yeah.
100, even just the last 50 years that we've gotten isolated into these small nuclear family units. So trying to live into that dream, little by little, and it's definitely been helpful for us to have a lot of community and family.
Sounds so fascinating. Is that something which is happening in the near future?
Yeah, we're working on it. I mean, we're actively cultivating our community right now. It's treeswing.life is our website. And we're looking around the greater Bay Area in California for property that we might be able to convert into co-housing. We want to have an affordable component to it. And we're working on getting the land and getting the finances together for it. And we'd love to have it happen sooner rather than later because our babe is turning 2 soon. So it'd be great for them to be able to grow up in community.
You also co-founded Infinite Humanity. I also read about your involvement with the Sea Stars. So talked about those initiatives and what inspired them.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just another feature about my personality is that I love starting things. So during the pandemic, when everything was crazy, we were like, what's going to happen? I don't know. Everything is topsy-turvy. My go-to is, well, I should start another business. So actually at that time, I pulled together a bunch of friends who I thought were incredibly talented, and we came up with this consulting firm, Resilient Markets, which is 2 PhDs and a friend who exited his electric vehicle charging company. We have expertise in different renewable energy fields, from hard science and patents to project management, grant applications, strategy, marketing. business development, prototyping. And then we also have a PhD in organizational governance systems. So making sure that all of your processes and your people side is dialed in. So with resilient markets, what I saw was that there were a bunch of social impact enterprises in my B Corp type ecosystem that were growing really quickly, in certain sectors like health tech, ed tech. And then within my social ecosystem of humans, I was seeing that people who were incredibly talented with great skills to offer were underemployed or unemployed. And so we began by matchmaking and creating an umbrella for people to be able to consult with organizations. And that has grown into an entire suite that we're developing of regenerative design principles. So what does it look like for your organization to be able to implement these principles, and whatever the output is, it will be regenerative? So basically thinking permaculture, but for anything, right? Like, what does permaculture for people look like? And this has been really, really well documented in areas like architecture with LEED and green buildings. So that's an example of what a fully built out suite of principles looks like. And what do those principles look like for other industries? And what's an overarching set of principles that could be applied? So we're developing a lot of thought around that school of regenerative design principles now with resilient markets, which, has very clear ties to the work that I'm doing in 10 Power. And then for fun, yeah, I sing in a girl band called the Sea Stars, and we like to create regenerative harmonies for a future that's possible. And that's just an expression of joy for me. I think it's really important in the climate movement that we not only be talking about doom and gloom and all the problems with the present, but we also be painting a picture of what the future could hold and be inviting people with beauty into that future. And in the activism that I do, I've been focused recently on music and street theater. So I think if people see something that is curious, right? If they see people being silly, or they see people in costumes, or, doing something that's whimsical, they're going to be a lot more curious than if somebody was just yelling at them with a megaphone, right? So being able to utilize our creativity, music, art to demonstrate what's possible, I think is incredibly important. We get stuck in such a dystopian cycle. And if you're always looking behind you at the ground, how are you going to walk forward? So it's very important that we not only be surrounding ourselves with these dystopian Black Mirror narratives, but that we also be imagining what's possible. And, Edgar Allan Poe wrote not only horror stories, but also published an editorial of sci-fi in the newspaper, and had these whimsical stories. This couple was bored in their village, and then this balloon floated by. So they attached a basket to it and floated up into the sky. And then simultaneously, a lot of the elements on the periodic table were discovered at that time. So creating the imaginary space, painting the picture of what the future could hold, actually leads to the scientific advancements to be able to get there. And this is something that we focus on with the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And what the founder, Peter Fikowski, who's also an investor in 10 Power, says is, if I said I wanted to go to Hawaii and I just started traveling west, there's a very low probability that I would get there, right? But if I said, I want to go to Hawaii on February 20th, and then I book a flight, boom, I'm there, right? So with climate targets, why are we just kind of floating in this nebulous sea, right? We need very distinct and defined targets, and we need a map of how to get there. And when we do get there, we need to be able to land in illustrious and beautiful worlds where everyone is thriving. And so being able to paint that roadmap and being able to expand our collective imagination to hold this reality, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, I love that. Sandra, did you always know that you're going to be this entrepreneur? I can't imagine you going and, getting yourself stuck, for lack of a better word, in a controlled corporate environment.
No, not at all. At the beginning of founding 10 Power, I felt like I had a little light and there was darkness all around me, and I would hold out the light and I would take a step And then that's when the next stepping stone would emerge, is as I was taking the step. So each step forward was a little bit of a plunge into darkness for me. And so the path has not been illuminated in a clear fashion. A lot of it has been somewhat of a trust leap for me. And so I think that for folks who are interested in getting into entrepreneurship, there are lots of first steps. You don't have to know what the end step is, right, to take the first step. And oftentimes, people will describe the journey of a startup as a sailboat, right? You never sail directly from point A to point B. You tack and you jive and you tack and you jive, right? And you go with the elements. And so based on market forces and new information, right, you're going to constantly be charting your course. And it's really interesting where that course takes you, because it could be something that you never even imagined when you started out.
So who were those, cheerleaders in the journey then? How do you make sure you stayed on the course?
Yeah, I feel very lucky in the folks who I have in my community, in all of their resources that have been provided to 10 Power in terms of mentorship, programs that we've participated in. The Echoing Green Fellowship has been just an absolute honor to participate in, has been such a supportive global community of social impact entrepreneurs, and has really acknowledged the whole person. It's not just about you and your idea and your project that you're working on today, because Echoing Green invests in individuals who are working on changing the world for the better. So they know even if your venture that you're working on now doesn't work out, you are still as an individual going to be committed to this cause. The Keeling Curve Prize, in which we were a finalist, has provided internships for us. So they have paid for interns to work with 10 Power. And so I've been really lucky to work with a lot of young people. And it's been really thrilling and inspiring for me, seeing where they go in their careers and being either climate focused when they came in, or even maybe pivoting their direction towards climate after working with 10 Power. And yeah, supportive of my family, my friend group. Most of my friends are really into climate too. And really the contributions from our investors, different investor networks, prizes, fellowships, and the incredible talent of our team and partners.
As we end the conversation, do you have any parting thoughts for leaders as they find their North Star?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of innate wisdom that women hold, being nurturers and being mothers of concepts and ideas. And I've found in communities of women, we also were invested in by SheEO, which is a global network of women investing in women. And I almost didn't apply to SheEO because it didn't explicitly say anything about environmentalism or climate in their initial pitch. But then it's amazing once you get into the network and you see what types of ventures that women just naturally choose. It's a group of women who have each put in money, who's voting on where that money goes. All of the ventures are doing positive things for the planet. So just seeing where women gravitate and invest themselves and their capital and their time into has been really powerful. So just always know that you're not alone. There are so many resources that are out there for you, and just taking that first step, even if it's a step into darkness, the stepping stone will emerge and there will be people there to support you, and just keep shining your light into the universe, and the people who believe in your cause will be attracted to it.
What do you think is this one trait which has made you what it has?
My grandmother had a single word, perseverance.
I love that.
And, in her time, she became an editor of the New York Times as, a woman of my grandmother's generation. And that single characteristic of perseverance, has inspired me so much through my grandmother, through my mother. And I hope that I embody as well. And especially in working in difficult areas, like not letting the blows get you down, and just keep the eye on the prize and keep persevering has really been one of my mantras.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for this conversation. And I look forward to circling back with you and seeing where it goes.
Thank you, Edma. Thank you so much for having me and for all the important work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you for being a part of this incredible journey with Atlanta Diaries. I have had the privilege of hosting guests who courageously shared their most vulnerable selves with me. And even if only a small segment of these conversations can champion the journey of one person, it will be worth each and every moment. And together, we know we can create an even greater impact. So I do have a humble request for you. If you found value in these episodes, please consider sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and on your social media. I would also love to hear your thoughts and will really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review or rating. See you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.